1,000 songs. And it goes right in my pocket.
Failure of the future has to be a nation that is agile, that is innovative, that is creative.
Welcome to Future Squared, the podcast all about innovation in the enterprise, brought to you and run by Collective Campus, an innovation hub based in Australia that works with companies to help them adopt the mindset, methodologies and tools to successfully explore new business models and disruptive innovation in an era of rapid change. For more information, go to www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Welcome back to the show, everybody. Today's guest is Braden Kelley. He's an experienced innovation and change speaker, trainer, and digital transformation strategist. He specializes in building cultures of continuous and accelerating innovation and change. He's the author of Stoking Your Innovation Bonfire and Charting Change, and has been advising companies on how to increase their revenue and cut their costs since 1996. Braden is passionate about innovation and has published more than 650 articles for online publications. In his spare time, Braden is a co-founder and chief innovation officer of the popular global innovation community, innovationexcellence.com, which is home to more than 7,500 articles, and he's also an innovation leader on Twitter. He was previously Improvement and Innovation Manager at Primera Blue Cross, Change and Marketing Strategist at Business Strategy Innovation, and is currently an Innovation and Change Strategy Consultant at Liberty Mutual Insurance. So with that, I bring you Braden Kelley. Welcome to the show, Braden.
Thank you, Steve.
It's great to have you on the show. Firstly, I couldn't find anything about what you do in your spare time except for running the incredibly successful innovationexcellence.com. What does Braden Kelley do other than help organizations stoke their innovation bonfire?
Well, I like to play basketball in my spare time and spend time with my family.
Yeah.
And living here in Seattle, from when things are nice, then that includes getting outside and walking in the forest or doing a bit of hiking. Nice.
And I guess Seattle no longer has a basketball team.
No, they don't, other than we do have a women's professional basketball team.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I was a big fan of Sean Kemp and Detlef Schrempf back in the mid-90s.
Yes, and Gary Payton.
Yeah, such a star-studded lineup. Anyways, I better not get into professional sports, otherwise we'll be talking that for a while. So, here to talk to you today about change management and innovation. And, today things are moving faster than ever, and the biggest risk is ultimately in standing still. So change management is more critical now than it's ever been. However, 70% of change programs fail, which aligns closely with, waterfall project failure rates. And your most recent book, Charting Change, focuses on the best practices of organizational change, which ultimately serve to bring this failure rate down and increase benefits realization. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the book came to be, Braden?
Sure. So the impetus for the book was really looking around organizations that I've been working with and really thinking about the progression that the innovation management and innovation leadership professions had gone through, that when you started to get down to the nitty-gritty of it, organizations that are terrible at change or suck at change end up being terrible at innovation as well. Because ultimately, innovation, if something is truly going to be an innovation and not just an incremental improvement, then it's going to inflict a lot of change on the organization inside, but then also on other organizations in the ecosystem outside the organization. And so really, it kind of came to me in a dream, so to speak, almost 5 years after the first book, Stoking Your Innovation Bonfire, that there was a real need for organizations to get better at how they go about planning and executing change. And I had some visions for some tools that I thought would help people visualize and collaborate around the change topic and try to all get on the same page for change. And so I started to create those tools first, actually before creating a book. And then as the change planning toolkit started to take shape, then it made sense to have a companion publication to go with it to help people not only understand how to use some of the elements of the change planning toolkit, but also to understand some of the key best practices around organizational change, and then also to bring in some new voices to the conversation through a series of guest experts that are sprinkled throughout the book to highlight some next practices for organizational change.
Sure.
And then also to highlight some of the the frameworks and principles that are uniquely my own that I wanted to add to the conversation, and that some of which are captured in some of the frameworks and tools in the toolkit.
So you've touched a couple of times there on the change planning toolkit, and I know there's an accompanying canvas that goes with it. Can you tell us a little bit more at a high level what this change planning toolkit looks like and what it helps change managers do?
Sure. So the change planning toolkit is designed to primarily help people upfront as they're starting to look at engaging in a change effort, and help them visualize, collaborate, and plan their change effort so that they can try to beat that 70% change failure rate. Because a lot of times what happens is either people don't plan because the prospect of staring at a blank Word document is pretty scary, or they start from the premise of, I should create a project charter, which again leads you to a Microsoft Word document that's sitting there staring at you blankly again, and forces you into more of a solo activity approach, typically, where you start to create it and then you start to share it with people, and then maybe you start to begin your effort, and a lot of times people get into the middle of their effort and realize that there's a bunch of landmines that they had just stepped on and blew the project to bits. And so the change planning canvas and the other frameworks and tools in the change planning toolkit are designed to help people literally get all on the same page, and in the case of the canvas, but then the other tools and frameworks in the toolkit are designed to help people populate the canvas and to really guide the conversations that need to happen to help surface those hidden traps of death that could doom the project, so that you can have those difficult conversations earlier on and surface some of the risks that you might not have otherwise found, and some of the barriers and obstacles, and start to have those conversations around not only what they are, but what your approach is going to be to deal with those and to mitigate those. So the canvas is designed to be a living document as well. So if something comes up, as people like to say, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face.
Mike Tyson.
So when you do get punched in the face, it gives you a good opportunity to update your canvas and print it out at a nice, poster size with the full version of the toolkit posted on the walls, so that everybody walking by, can remember what it is that you're trying to achieve, and the challenges that you inherently know are present in the effort.
Definitely. And I think there's a lot of parallels between change management and innovation, entrepreneurship, etc. I had a conversation the other day with Ben Yoskovitz, the author of Lean Analytics, and we were discussing how entrepreneurs and even corporate entrepreneurs often want to feel productive. And so rather than, as you alluded to, staring at a blank Word document and planning, they just go out and do it. And oftentimes what happens is they get to a certain point, and then there's all these issues, and it's the cost of changing at that point is much higher than what it would be if you had to spend the time up front to identify this sort of thing. So as is the case with Lean Startup, you've got your business model canvas. It provides a bit more of a framework. You go out, you test some assumptions, you learn from that, and you go back to your canvas and you update it, and it's visible, and people are across the business model, where it's going. It sounds as if the change planning toolkit is a similar tool, but focusing, as the name suggests, on change.
It is designed to be a visual tool. It is designed to be a collaborative tool. I highlight very specifically in the book that you should have a change planning team, and that there's a number of different roles that need to be filled as part of your change team for the effort to be successful. And then I also highlight a series of change mindsets that people are going to have either in support or opposition to your change, that you can either harness or ignore as you try to either pursue success or failure with your change effort.
Sure.
But just to highlight one of the things that you were saying, in regards to innovation and change are similar in some aspects. One of the things that I really like to highlight is that something isn't going to be an innovation unless it's replacing something else. And that in and of itself means that something's going to have to change. And so I think oftentimes people don't really fully think through the fact that if they are truly going to achieve an innovation, that their innovation must replace the existing solution. And in so, you're going to need to have a plan for how that is going to happen and how you're going to get people to change their behavior and how you're going to get the ecosystem to change in order to support your innovation and make it, number one, possible, but then number two, successful.
Yeah, that's right. And, you've talked about getting people to change their behaviors. And, I think there's different types of people within large organizations, and certain people may fall into the category of being quite risk averse. They prefer stability, come in at 9, clock off at 5. And I guess putting people like that through a change program can often be akin to putting a square peg through a round hole. And while they serve a very valid purpose, oftentimes it's all about maintaining the core business model, keeping that ticking over. They can often sabotage a company's sort of endeavors to innovate or to change. So, what's your opinion on how companies can best deal with, the way things have always been done around here sort of cohort?
Well, I think that one of the ways that you deal with it is you try to identify up front the kinds of mindsets that are out there and how you're going to motivate people in different ways to maybe not join the train when it starts to leave the station, but as the train moves on to jump on board, but also try to identify up front the different roles that need to be filled for the change effort to be successful, and to identify up front as much as possible who is going to help or who can help the effort and who is likely to resist, and who also is likely to be impacted the most, and then who's likely potentially not to be affected at all, and try to consider those groups up front, and even invite them, into the conversation up front as part of your change planning sessions, so that you get those different perspectives. And part of the change planning, workshop or offsite is really to dig into trying to picture today and picture tomorrow, and try to really flesh out what the desired, not only the desired state looks like, but what the current state looks like, and in doing so, try to get a better sense of how you're going to transition from one to the other, and where things could go off the rails.
Yeah, that's right. And I think involving people who you think will be more resistant to change up front is definitely more beneficial than saying, hey, this is what we're going to do, and you either jump on that train or you don't.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess one of the things that it prevents many large companies from successfully innovating is that they're essentially built to execute. They're built to execute upon a repeatable business model, not necessarily to look for new business models. And therefore, they've got policies, procedures, values, systems in place that are there for a valid reason. They keep the core business ticking over, but they don't support the exploration of new business models. Do you have any thoughts on how organizations tread what is quite a fine line between supporting the core business and exploring, say, disruptive innovation?
Sure. So I think that there's a couple things there. One of the things that I introduced fairly recently and sort of laid the framework out there as part of the 10 free downloads, the sample downloads from the Change Planning Toolkit, which people can get at charting-change or charting-change. Charting-change.
Don't forget that hyphen. We'll share that in the show notes for our listeners.
Is the organizational agility framework, and it really highlights the fact that for an organization to be agile and to be successful at managing that tension between exploitation and exploration is that you need to have the right amount of flexibility and fixedness.
Yeah.
And so to go fast and to optimize the speed of the organization, there are certain things that you need to have in place that nobody messes with, and that allows people to tweak the other things as the organization moves forward. And then there's areas where you want to be flexible, but if you're too flexible, nothing goes forward, and if you're too fixed, then you have no ability to innovate or to change.
Yeah.
And so it's finding that right balance for your organization, And for organizations to remain relevant and not go extinct, it's finding that right balance between operating the existing business as efficient as possible while exploring for new opportunities that their customers, that your customer group that you have the greatest trust with can execute upon under the umbrella of your brand, under the umbrella of your reasons to believe. And maybe you do that exploration internally, maybe you do it externally, but the key is to set things up so that you can explore and then have the mechanisms in place to scale the new opportunities, and to help the exploration group understand some of the key elements that could cause their brilliant idea to fail as they look to scale it. And so, maybe that's materials and manufacturing, or maybe it's customer mindset and their readiness for the new thing.
Sure.
But there's always that tension between what you think is brilliant and what you'd like to do and what the customer is ready for and what you can manufacture in a way that ends up being profitable. And so you need to balance the exploration and the scaling aspects of the organization and help them find that common language so that you can bridge an idea from one side to the other and make it move forward and in success into the marketplace and move from an invention to be a true innovation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And many people believe that change management is more or less a subset of project management. However, you've rightly suggested that project management is actually a subset of change management. It's actually the other way around. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. So my belief is that if you look at the area of organizational change, you have your capital C or your big C change, which are your mergers and acquisitions, your layoffs, your digital transformations, things like that, big projects where you need big teams of people and cross-functional collaboration to make things happen in a big way. And then you have your small c or little c change efforts, which, if you think about it, every project changes something. If it's not going to change something, then why are you doing it? Why are you going through the pain of planning this project and managing it and executing it? So every project is ultimately a change effort, and how big of change effort it is depends on the size of the project. So that's why I believe that instead of project managers thinking of change management as a bolt-on or a nice to have at the end where maybe it only focuses on adoption, we need to turn that paradigm on its head and realize that the organization should be driven by strategy that fundamentally determines what the architecture of the business looks like and the capabilities that the organization needs to have in order to support the strategy. And that should change over time. And as it does, then you look at what change efforts you need to have to build the new capabilities or to revise the existing capabilities. And from those, you start to have a set of projects. And so your change efforts are determined before your projects are determined. And so therefore, your change planning should happen first, and your project planning should be a subset of your change planning. And I've also laid out my thoughts and my vision for that in one of the 10 free downloads as well. Yeah,
and that kind of reminds me of GE, who they trained over 1,000 middle managers in lean startup, and then what they found was that they went back to their business units. It was difficult to actually implement because the underlying culture didn't really support experimentation, moving quickly, failing fast. In this case, you're proposing that we get a culture of change. That's essentially our foundation. We get that right first. We become more adaptable to change, and then once we have that in place, then we set up our projects, and we're more likely to deliver successful projects with benefits realization at the end of them than we are if we're to approach change management individually each and every time we set up a project.
Yes, and as what you can find is that an organization that right now may seem very resistant to change. As you work hard to provide people with the right tools and beliefs and understandings and knowledge, then people can start to execute their change efforts and their projects in ways that become successful. And as people get more comfortable with the tools, then the mindset shifts from resisting change to expecting change. And as that happens, then people almost get upset when the organization is not changing fast enough.
That's an interesting proposition. So I guess this concept of agile change that you've spoken of previously, can you elaborate on what agile change is for our listeners?
Sure. So agile change, as I see it, is starting to bring some of the agile sort of thoughts into the change space. And one of the key things that leads to, in my mind, and how I've tried to lay it out in the book, is very famous people talk about quick wins, and much more famous than me. And while I think that quick wins have a place, I don't think they're the most important thing. And I think momentum is the most important thing, and maintaining momentum throughout a project, throughout a change effort. And the way that you start to get there is by consciously designing your change program in a way that the chunks are of more similar sizes, and you start to approach it more like, agile software development, where you have a series of sprints, and you have a series of huddles and stand-up meetings to try to keep everybody sort of on the same page as you move forward. And it's not just this big plan that you create that people move through prescriptively, but that it's sort of a living, breathing effort. And you're most focused on maintaining momentum so that you keep that executive sponsorship, you keep that interest and engagement on the part of the people that are working as part of the team and working to help make happen what you're trying to have happen. And so it can be supported through tools in the toolkit, like the Agile Change Kanban, and it can also be supported by the understanding of the organizational agility framework, and trying to work to strike that balance between flexibility and fixedness. And so it's really making that shift from quick wins to momentum, and trying to pull in some of the principles of Agile to sort of make sure that you're right-sizing the elements of your project to help you maintain that momentum.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it reminds me of a conversation I actually had earlier today with Whitney Johnson, the author of Disrupt Yourself, and we were talking about how 70% of American workers are actively disengaged, and therefore less likely to get the most out of these people for their organizations. So if we, for example, I often refer to your big 3, 4, 5 year sort of transformation projects that many large organizations undertake. I guess they'd fall into your big C category. But what often happens is people that are engaged in these projects are, I suppose, essentially disengaged, because there is no sort of ongoing benefits realization, and you get to the end of this 3, 4, 5 year period, which, if in today's day and age, I'm not sure anyone sticks around that long, but if you did and there was no benefits realization, it's like, well, what did I do for the last 5 years? Whereas this whole concept of agile change, which aligns beautifully, I think, with, as you said, agile software development methodology, lean startup, you've got that momentum, you've got that constant customer contact, you've got constant benefits realization, and people can see that, hey, everything we're doing is actually generating some sort of value, and therefore people are more likely to become engaged and more likely to stick around in that organization a little bit longer.
Right, yes. People are hard-pressed to wait 3 to 5 years to see some sort of benefit, and in that way, that's very much a waterfall type approach. And the other problem that you start to run into if you design things with small things up front to get your quick wins, and then really big components later on as people start to disengage. But also you may see turnover in the team that occurs, because these days 3 to 5 years is also a long time for somebody to not get laid off or not go to join another company. So so there's a lot of things that can go wrong if you end up having stretches of the project that are much too long for people to remain engaged.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Braden, I want to wrap up with 3 questions. So 2 hypotheticals and 1 on what I like to call lifestyle design. Question number 1, if you could work for any company at any stage of their life cycle, who would it be and why?
Wow, that's a tough one.
It is.
If I could work for any company at any stage of their life cycle, well, I mean that's making a big assumption that I have the skills to do so.
Based on the lens that you see the world through.
But I think if I could have worked for any company at any stage, it probably would have been to work at Pixar, because I really enjoy the storytelling aspect of life and of business. And so sometimes I think of myself as a business artist, and in some ways I think I was born 50 years too early, because I don't think anybody has, not anybody, but I think very few people have an idea of the value or potential value of a business artist or a business storyteller. And so a lot of the content that I create is working to make things easier to understand and hopefully surface insights in a way that people can pick up and run with quickly. And it would be fun to have worked for Pixar in the early days to try to figure out how to use basically technology to tell stories and use a new medium for telling stories. And Pixar isn't just about technology, it's about storytelling, and never would succeed without the storytelling. So merging technology with storytelling together is very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And I think storytelling is more important now, perhaps than ever before. And one of my guilty pleasures is, in fact, watching Disney Pixar films. And I guess on the topic of Pixar, I recently came across Creativity Inc., Ed Catmull's book about how they stoke the innovation bonfire at Pixar. And it's a really interesting read, and I highly recommend it for anyone that hasn't already picked that up before. So kicking on to number 2. I believe this one's not as difficult, but it probably is. If you could ask anybody, dead or alive, a question, who would it be and what would you ask?
Wow. Okay. That's almost harder. Wow. I think I would go back and ask, I believe it was Abraham Lincoln who was responsible for the train that's left the station. But I'd like to go back and ask the president that just decided to allow a corporation to be considered a person. Because I think it's very interesting that A, that distinction has been made, and B, that all the other things that go along with being a person have not been ascribed to in the same way. So if a corporation kills a person, then nobody from the corporation ever goes to jail for killing someone. But if a person kills a person, then they do. So it's very interesting that a corporation is considered a person, but not in 100% of the way.
Oh, that's a great answer. And finally, I like to get inside the heads of people that are doing awesome things. You've built Innovation Excellence up to quite a big platform, more than 17,000 members, I believe, at last count, and doing great stuff in the innovation space with the books you've written and whatnot. And I guess I'm curious to find out a little bit more about how you stay on top of your game. Have you got any particular ways you approach your day? Do you get up early and gym and all that sort of stuff? What do you do?
I usually get up about 5 and get ready and get off to work and take care of all the business that needs to get taken care of. I try to make time to play some basketball and spend time with family, and I try also to not work in the same location for more than a couple hours at a time if I can, which can drive some people crazy. But for me, there's different spaces with different creative capacity and different types. Or they can go to charting-change.com to find out more about the toolkit and the book.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Steve. It was great speaking with you, and best of luck with the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed today's chat with Braden Kelley. If you did, I'd love it if you'd spend just a minute to give the show a 5-star rating on iTunes or Stitcher. If you have any questions about today's program or questions for Braden, feel free to shoot them across to myself on steve@collectivecamp.us. You can also sign up to our mailing list at www.futuresquared.xyz. Until next time, Future Squared out.